I'm Sarah, 28, and last Thanksgiving changed everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. What started as our usual family gathering ended with my father screaming that I was no daughter of his and throwing me out of the house I grew up in. But here's the thing about family betrayals. They have a way of revealing truths that have been hiding in plain sight for years. That night didn't just destroy our family dinner, it exposed a web of lies, financial manipulation, and favoritism that had been poisoning our family for decades. What my parents didn't expect was that their disappointment daughter had learned a thing or two about playing the long game. But before we dive into how I turned their own tactics against them and delivered the kind of justice that would make Reddit's revenge community proud, I want to hear from you. What do you think happened that could tear a family apart so completely? Drop your predictions in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe because this story has more twists than a soap opera, and trust me, you won't want to miss how karma came full circle in ways none of us saw coming. Growing up, I was what you'd call the good daughter, straight A's, captain of the debate team, full scholarship to a prestigious university where I studied business and finance. Meanwhile, my younger brother Jake was the golden child who could do no wrong despite his constant screw-ups. Failed out of 3 colleges? Jake's just finding himself. Crashed 2 cars? Boys will be boys. Got arrested for drunk driving? It's just a phase. The pattern was so ingrained in our family dynamic that I stopped questioning it years ago. My parents, Robert and Linda, ran a successful real estate business that they'd built from nothing over 30 years. Dad was the face of the company, charming, persuasive, the kind of guy who could sell ice to Eskimos. Mom handled the books and operations, meticulous and controlling in ways that would make a drill sergeant proud. I graduated summa cum laude and immediately got a job at a top-tier investment firm in Manhattan. While Jake bounced between various entrepreneurial ventures that mysteriously always needed funding from the bank of Mom and Dad, I was climbing the corporate ladder, making 6 figures before my 20th birthday, and saving every penny I could. But here's what I didn't realize until much later. My success was actually working against me in my parents' eyes. Every promotion I earned, every milestone I achieved, seemed to make them more resentful rather than proud. Family dinners became exercises in passive-aggressive comments about how I was too busy for family, or how my corporate job was changing me into someone they didn't recognize. The red flags were there, glaring and obvious in retrospect. Like how they never asked about my work unless it was to criticize it. How they'd change the subject whenever I tried to share good news. How Jake's failures were always met with sympathy and financial bailouts, while my successes were met with criticism about being materialistic or forgetting where I came from. I should have seen it coming when they started making comments about my apartment in the city, calling it too expensive and showing off. Never mind that I'd saved for 2 years to afford the down payment and was paying the mortgage with money I'd earned through 60-hour work weeks and countless overtime hours. The worst part? I kept trying to win their approval, kept thinking that if I just worked harder, achieved more, proved myself further, they'd finally see me the way they saw Jake. I was so desperate for their validation that I ignored every sign that their love came with conditions I could never meet. Looking back, I realized they needed me to fail because my success highlighted Jake's failures too starkly. In their twisted logic, having 2 successful children would mean admitting they'd enabled Jake's mediocrity for years. It was easier to tear me down than to build him up. But that Thanksgiving, all pretenses were about to come crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. And for the first time in my life, I was about to see my family's true colors in their full, ugly glory. That Thanksgiving started like every other holiday gathering for the past decade, with me driving 4 hours from Manhattan to my childhood home in Connecticut, armed with expensive wine and carefully chosen gifts that would inevitably be met with polite but lukewarm responses. The house looked exactly the same as always. Perfectly manicured lawn, tasteful seasonal decorations, and that general air of upper-middle-class respectability that my parents wore like armor. Jake's beat-up Honda was already in the driveway, which meant he'd probably been there for days, sleeping in his old room and eating Mom's cooking while avoiding the adult responsibilities that came with being 31 years old. This had become his pattern whenever his latest get-rich-quick scheme inevitably collapsed. The moment I walked through the front door, I could feel the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Mom's smile was tighter than usual, Dad's greeting more perfunctory than warm. Jake lounged on the couch in sweats, playing video games like he was still 16, barely grunting acknowledgement when I said hello. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk," Mom said, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant serious business. "After dinner, of course. Let's not ruin the meal." That should have been my first warning. In our family, serious conversations were usually reserved for my failures, like the time they sat me down to lecture me about work-life balance when I missed Jake's birthday party for a crucial client presentation. Good news never required a formal sit-down. Dinner was a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. Every topic of conversation somehow circled back to Jake's latest venture, a cryptocurrency trading scheme that he swore was going to make him millions. Dad nodded along enthusiastically, asking detailed questions about blockchain technology he clearly didn't understand, while Mom praised Jake's entrepreneurial spirit and willingness to take risks. When they bothered to include me in the conversation, it was to make pointed observations about how corporate life was making me rigid and how I needed to learn to take chances like your brother. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here I was, having built a successful career through actual hard work and smart financial decisions, being lectured about risk-taking by people who had been bankrolling their adult sons' failures for over a decade. "You know, Sarah," Dad said, cutting into his turkey with unnecessary force, "success isn't just about money. It's about family, about being there for the people who matter. Your brother understands that." Jake smirked from across the table, and something cold settled in my stomach. This felt orchestrated, rehearsed. Like they'd all discussed what they were going to say to me before I arrived. "I am here," I said carefully. "I drove 4 hours to have dinner with you." "Are you, though?" Mom's voice had that sharp edge that meant she was building up to something big. "Because it feels like you've been pulling away from this family for years. Ever since you got that fancy job and moved to the city, you've acted like you're too good for us." The accusation hit like a slap. Too good for them? I'd been bending over backward, trying to maintain a relationship with people who seemed determined to find fault with everything I did. But before I could defend myself, Dad jumped in. "Your mother's right. You've changed, Sarah. You've become selfish, materialistic. You don't call unless you want something, you miss family events for work, and when you are here, you act like you're doing us some kind of favor." The gaslighting was so blatant it took my breath away. I called them every Sunday. I sent flowers on their anniversary, expensive gifts for birthdays and holidays. I'd never missed a major family event except for that one birthday party, and I'd apologized profusely for that. But Jake, who hadn't held a steady job in 5 years, who borrowed money he never repaid, who only showed up when he needed something, he was the good son who understood family. That's when I realized this wasn't a spontaneous holiday blow-up. This was an intervention, and I was the target. "We've made a decision," Mom announced, her voice steady despite the bomb she was about to drop. "We're revising our will." The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I set down my fork, my appetite completely gone, while Jake continued eating as if we were discussing the weather. His lack of surprise told me everything I needed to know. He'd been part of this conversation long before I arrived. "We're leaving everything to Jake," Dad continued, not even bothering to look at me. "The house, the business, your mother's jewelry, all of it. You've made it clear that money is the most important thing to you, so you shouldn't have any problem making your own way in the world." The sheer audacity of it knocked the wind out of me. They were disinheriting me while simultaneously claiming I was materialistic. They were punishing me for being financially independent by ensuring I'd receive nothing, while rewarding Jake's financial dependence with everything. You're kidding, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. We're completely serious, Mom said, her tone suggesting I was being dramatic. This family needs someone who understands the value of loyalty, of being there when it matters. Jake has proven himself in that regard. Jake had proven himself? Jake, who'd stolen money from Mom's purse in high school. Jake, who'd forged Dad's signature on a loan application 2 years ago. Jake, who'd shown up to family functions more times than I could count. What exactly has Jake proven? I asked, finding my voice. That he can live off your money indefinitely? That he can fail at every single thing he tries and still expect you to bail him out? Don't you dare speak about your brother that way. Dad's voice rose to a shout. At least he's not too proud to need his family. At least he doesn't act like we're beneath him. The projection was stunning. They were angry at me for not needing their money, while simultaneously accusing me of being greedy. They were praising Jake for his dependence while criticizing my independence. I have never, not once, acted like you were beneath me, I said, my voice shaking with anger and hurt. I have bent over backward trying to maintain a relationship with this family, and apparently, my only crime is being successful enough that I don't need to borrow money from you every month. Success? Mom laughed, a sound so bitter it made me flinch. You call isolating yourself from your family success? You call putting work before the people who raised you success? I put work first one time. Don't lie to us, Sarah. Dad's face was red now, his composure completely gone. You've made your priorities crystal clear. Your career matters more than this family. Your money matters more than our feelings. Well, fine. If that's how you want to live, you can live it without us. That's when Jake finally spoke up, his voice casual as if he were commenting on a TV show. Maybe it's better this way. Sarah's always been different from us anyway. She never really fit in. Never really fit in. The words hit like a physical blow because they confirmed what I'd suspected for years, but never wanted to admit. I'd never been truly welcome in my own family. I'd been tolerated, criticized, and held to impossible standards while Jake was celebrated for meeting the bare minimum of human decency. You're right, I said quietly, standing up from the table. I am different from you. I actually worked for what I have instead of expecting handouts. I built a life instead of leeching off other people's success. And clearly, that makes me the villain in this story. Don't you take that tone with us, Mom snapped. We're your parents. We deserve respect. Respect is earned, I shot back, 28 years of suppressed frustration finally boiling over. And you've earned nothing but my disappointment. That's when Dad exploded. Get out. Dad screamed, standing so violently that his chair toppled backward. Get out of my house right now. You are not my daughter. No daughter of mine would speak to her parents this way. The words echoed through the dining room like gunshots. Mom gasped dramatically, pressing her hand to her chest as if I'd physically attacked her. Jake just sat there with a satisfied smirk, finally seeing the moment he'd probably been hoping for his entire life, his sister being cast out so he could have our parents' undivided attention and resources. Robert, please, Mom said, but her tone suggested she was putting on a show rather than genuinely trying to calm him down. Don't say things you can't take back. I mean every word, Dad snarled, his face purple with rage. She's made her choice. Money over family, career over loyalty. She's no child of mine. The finality in his voice was what did it. Not just the anger, but the certainty. This wasn't a heat-of-the-moment outburst that he'd apologize for later. This was a decision he'd clearly been building toward for months, maybe years. I looked around the room one last time. At the family photos that would no longer include me, at the dining table where I'd never be welcome again, at the faces of people who'd just erased me from their lives as easily as deleting a contact from their phone. You're absolutely right, I said, my voice eerily calm despite the storm raging inside me. I did make a choice. I chose to build something with my life instead of tearing others down. I chose to be independent instead of codependent. And you know what? I'm proud of those choices. As the weight of this moment settled in, I couldn't help but think about all of you watching this unfold. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally actually had a whole list of conditions? When you discover that your biggest achievement, becoming self-sufficient, is somehow your greatest sin in their eyes. If you're dealing with toxic family dynamics, drop a comment and let me know you're not alone in this. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like the scapegoat in your own family story, because what happened next changed everything, and I promise you won't want to miss how this all comes full circle. I walked to the entryway and grabbed my coat, my hands surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Behind me, I could hear Mom making soothing sounds to Dad, telling him he'd done the right thing, that they couldn't enable my selfish behavior anymore. "Sarah, wait," Jake called out, and for a split second, I thought maybe he was going to stand up for me. Maybe some spark of brotherly loyalty had survived all the years of favoritism and competition. I turned around hopefully. "Leave your key," he said with a smile that could have curdled milk. That's when I knew this wasn't just about the will or the inheritance. This was about power, control, and Jake's deep-seated need to be the only child who mattered. He'd finally orchestrated the perfect scenario where he got everything and I got nothing. I pulled my house key off my keychain and set it on the hall table with a deliberate calmness that clearly surprised them. They'd expected me to beg, to cry, to promise to change if they'd just give me another chance. Instead, I was giving them exactly what they'd asked for. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said, looking each of them in the eye. "I came here today planning to tell you that I'd been saving money to help you renovate the kitchen. I had $15,000 set aside as a surprise gift because I wanted to give back to the family that raised me." Mom's face went pale. Dad's anger flickered for just a moment, replaced by something that looked almost like regret. "But I guess I'll find something else to do with that money now," I continued. "Maybe I'll take that European vacation I've been putting off. Or invest it in my retirement account. After all, I'm apparently so materialistic and selfish that I might as well live up to your expectations." I opened the front door and paused, looking back at the three of them one last time. "You wanted to disown me? Congratulations. Consider it mutual." The drive back to Manhattan was a blur of tears and rage and a strange sense of liberation I wasn't ready to examine yet. But as the city lights came into view, I made a decision that would prove to be the first domino in a chain reaction they never saw coming. If they wanted to treat me like I was dead to them, then they were about to learn what it really meant to lose a daughter. The first few weeks after Thanksgiving were the hardest of my adult life. I'd essentially become an orphan by choice, cutting ties with the only family I'd ever known. The silence was deafening. No Sunday phone calls, no text messages asking about my week, no holiday planning emails from Mom. It was like I'd been erased from their lives as completely as if I'd never existed. But grief has a funny way of transforming into determination when you're angry enough. And I was beyond angry. I was furious at being cast aside so easily, furious at Jake's smugness, and furious at myself for being surprised by people who'd been showing me exactly who they were for years. That's when I decided to do what I do best, research. See, working in investment banking had taught me a few things about due diligence and financial investigation. When you're vetting potential deals worth millions of dollars, you learn to dig deep, to look beyond the surface numbers, to find the inconsistencies and red flags that tell the real story. So I started treating my own family like a potential investment, and what I found made my blood run cold. It began innocently enough. I was cleaning out old emails when I came across some financial documents Mom had sent me years ago when I was helping them set up their retirement accounts. Being the dutiful daughter, I'd kept copies of everything in my personal filing system: tax returns, business financial statements, investment portfolios. Looking at them now with fresh eyes and a banker's training, things started to add up in ways that painted a very different picture of my parents' financial situation. The real estate business that had supposedly been so successful? According to their tax returns, it had been losing money for the past 3 years. Not just breaking even, actively hemorrhaging cash at a rate that should have forced them into bankruptcy. But they were still living in the same expensive house, still driving luxury cars, still funding Jake's endless stream of failed ventures. Where was the money coming from? I spent my Christmas vacation doing what normal people would call stalking, but what I preferred to think of as forensic accounting. Public record searches, business registration databases, property tax assessments, all the digital breadcrumbs that modern life leaves behind. What I discovered was a web of financial manipulation so complex it would have impressed the criminals I'd helped prosecute during my brief stint working with white-collar crime investigators. Mom and Dad had been systematically borrowing against their life insurance policies, taking out home equity loans, and even using credit cards to maintain their lifestyle and support Jake's ventures. They owed nearly $200,000 across various creditors, and their house, the house they were planning to leave to Jake, had been mortgaged and remortgaged so many times it was essentially worthless as an inheritance. But here's where it got really interesting. They'd been hiding all of this debt from Jake too. The golden child had no idea that his inheritance was actually a massive pile of debt wrapped up in a pretty bow. He thought he was getting a successful business, a paid-off house, and a comfortable trust fund. In reality, he was inheriting financial ruin that would probably force him into bankruptcy within 6 months. My parents had built their entire punishment of me on a foundation of lies. They were disinheriting me from nothing while telling Jake he was getting everything, when everything was actually less than nothing. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. They'd accused me of being materialistic and money-obsessed while they'd been living a lie funded by debt and delusion. They'd praised Jake's entrepreneurial spirit while hiding the fact that every single one of his ventures had failed because they were poorly planned, underfunded, and managed by someone with no real business experience. But the real kicker came when I dug deeper into the recent financial activity. In the 6 months leading up to Thanksgiving, they'd liquidated almost all of their actual assets, Mom's jewelry, Dad's classic car collection, even their savings accounts, to fund Jake's latest cryptocurrency scheme. The same cryptocurrency scheme they'd been bragging about at dinner was a textbook pump-and-dump scam, and Jake had invested every penny they'd given him just days before the inevitable collapse. He'd lost everything, along with their everything, and he was too embarrassed or too cowardly to tell them. Which meant that at the exact moment they were lecturing me about family loyalty and financial responsibility, they were actually bankrupt. The whole dramatic disowning scene had been performed by people who were literally in no position to inherit anything to anyone. I sat in my apartment on New Year's Eve, surrounded by spreadsheets and financial documents, laughing until I cried at the sheer absurdity of it all. They'd cast me out of the family to protect Jake's position as the golden child, not realizing that there was no kingdom left for him to inherit. But I wasn't done investigating. Because if there's one thing I'd learned in my career, it's that when people are desperate enough to live this elaborately, there are usually even bigger secrets hiding underneath. And I was absolutely right. What I found next went beyond financial incompetence into outright fraud territory, and it changed everything I thought I knew about my parents' business and my childhood. Remember how I mentioned that their real estate company had been losing money for years? Well, it turns out they'd been cooking the books to hide just how badly things were going. Not just from Jake and me, but from the IRS, their business partners, and their creditors. Using my access to professional databases and some help from a college friend who worked in forensic accounting, I discovered a pattern of tax evasion, insurance fraud, and embezzlement that stretched back almost a decade. The business had been failing since 2015, right around the time Jake graduated college and started his parade of expensive failures. Instead of downsizing their lifestyle or admitting they couldn't afford to keep funding his dreams, my parents had decided to falsify business records, claim fake expenses, and even stage property damage for insurance payouts. They'd turned their legitimate real estate business into a criminal enterprise to maintain their facade of success and keep the money flowing to their favorite child. But the piece de resistance was what I found in Mom's personal financial records. She had a secret account, one that Dad apparently didn't know about, that she'd been using to funnel money to Jake for years. Money that she'd been embezzling from their joint accounts, their business accounts, and even the small trust fund my grandfather had set up for my college education. That's right. The college fund that had supposedly been used up for my education had actually been rated to pay for Jake's repeated failures, and my parents had been lying to me about it for over 6 years. The same parents who'd just disinherited me for being money-obsessed had literally stolen my inheritance to give to my brother, then had the audacity to lecture me about family values. At this point, I had enough evidence to destroy them completely. I could have reported them to the IRS, the State Insurance Commission, and probably gotten them both arrested for fraud. I could have made sure Jake learned about his precious inheritance before he got the nasty surprise of inheriting $250,000 in debt. But I wanted something more satisfying than just punishment. I wanted justice. I wanted them to experience the same sense of betrayal and abandonment they'd inflicted on me, but magnified by their own hypocrisy. So I started planning. The first step was securing my own position. I transferred all my savings to accounts they couldn't trace, updated my insurance beneficiaries to remove them completely, and made sure my apartment lease and all my financial obligations were solely in my name. If they'd taught me anything, it was that family could turn on you without warning, so I needed to be bulletproof. Then I started building my case file. Every fraudulent document, every falsified tax return, every insurance claim that I could prove was inflated or completely fabricated. I organized it all into a comprehensive portfolio that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. But I wasn't going to the authorities. Not yet. Instead, I was going to give my family exactly what they'd given me, a choice between honesty and consequences. I spent weeks crafting the perfect letter, one that laid out everything I'd discovered in meticulous detail. I included copies of the most damning evidence, along with a detailed timeline showing how they'd been funding Jake's ventures with stolen and fraudulent money for years. The letter ended with an ultimatum. They had 30 days to come clean to Jake about the real state of their finances and his inheritance, admit what they'd done to fund his lifestyle, and make a public apology for how they'd treated me. If they did that, I would keep their criminal activities private and even help them figure out a way forward that didn't involve prison time. If they didn't, I would turn everything over to the appropriate authorities and let the justice system handle it. But here's the thing about ultimatums, they only work if the other party believes you'll follow through. My parents had spent so many years thinking of me as the compliant, approval-seeking daughter that they couldn't imagine I'd actually destroy them. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were about who their daughter had become. I mailed the letter on Valentine's Day, which felt appropriately ironic. Then I sat back and waited to see if they'd learned anything from losing me, or if they'd doubled down on the same arrogance and entitlement that had gotten them into this mess in the first place. The response came faster than I'd expected, and it was so much worse than I'd imagined. 3 days after I sent the letter, my phone rang at 2 a.m. It was Jake, and he was absolutely hysterical. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he screamed before I could even say hello. "How could you make up these lies about Mom and Dad? How could you try to destroy our family because you're mad about not getting any money?" That's when I knew they'd shown him the letter, but had convinced him it was all fabricated. Even when confronted with documented proof of their crimes, they'd chosen to paint me as a vindictive liar rather than take responsibility for their actions. "Jake," I said calmly, "did you actually look at the evidence, or did you just listen to their explanation?" "I don't need to look at your fake documents," he snarled. "I know Mom and Dad. They would never do anything like what you're claiming. You're just jealous because they finally saw through your manipulative act." The irony was staggering. He was accusing me of manipulation while defending parents who'd been lying to all of us for years. But I could hear something else in his voice, uncertainty. Despite his bluster, some part of him was starting to question things. "Ask them about the cryptocurrency investment," I said quietly. Ask them to show you the current balance in that account. There was a long pause. They told me you somehow hacked their accounts and stole the money, he said, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. Jake, I work in investment banking. I make more money than that cryptocurrency account ever held, even when it was at its peak. Why would I need to steal from them? Another pause, longer this time. Just leave us alone, okay? Whatever game you're playing, just stop. They're talking about getting a restraining order. A restraining order. For sending a letter with evidence of their crimes. The audacity was breathtaking. Tell them they have 27 days left, I said, and hung up. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched from a distance as their world started falling apart in exactly the way I'd predicted. The cryptocurrency account Jake had invested in was exposed as a Ponzi scheme, making national news and wiping out thousands of investors. The business creditors started calling more frequently, and I could see from public records that they'd missed their last 2 mortgage payments. But still, no apology came. No acknowledgement of what they'd done. Instead, I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were telling everyone who'd listened that I'd had a mental breakdown and was trying to destroy them with false accusations because they'd rightfully removed me from their will. On day 28, I got a text from Mom. We will not be blackmailed by our own daughter. Dear worst. So I did. I'd spent weeks preparing multiple versions of my evidence package, tailored for different audiences. The version I sent to the IRS focused on tax evasion and unreported income. The package for the State Insurance Commission highlighted the fraudulent claims and staged incidents. The local police got a comprehensive overview of the embezzlement and forgery. But the most satisfying package was the one I sent to Jake's employer. See, what I hadn't mentioned earlier was that Jake actually did have a job. He worked part-time at a small investment firm that specialized in cryptocurrency trading. It wasn't a prestigious position, and he'd only gotten it because Dad had pulled some strings with a business contact, but it was legitimate employment. What wasn't legitimate was how Jake had been using his position to convince clients to invest in the same scam cryptocurrency that had wiped out our parents' savings. He'd been earning commissions on those sales, which meant he'd been profiting from the same fraud that had destroyed his own family's finances. His termination was immediate and very public in our small professional community. Within a month, the investigations were in full swing. Dad was arrested at his office on a Tuesday morning, Mom was taken into custody at home the same afternoon, and Jake lost his professional licenses before the week was out. The local news picked up the story because it had everything: family drama, financial fraud, and the kind of small-town scandal that people love to gossip about. Local real estate power, couple charged with million-dollar fraud scheme, was the headline that made me smile over my morning coffee. But the real satisfaction came from the phone call I received 2 months later. It was Jake, calling from a number I didn't recognize. "Sarah," he said, and his voice was completely different, hollow, defeated, stripped of all the arrogance and entitlement I'd grown up hearing. "I need to talk to you." "I'm listening," I said. They told me everything. About the money, about your college fund, about how long they've been lying to all of us. He was crying now, something I hadn't heard since we were children. "I had no idea. I swear to you, I had no idea." "I know," I said, and I meant it. Jake had always been selfish and spoiled, but he wasn't evil. He'd been as much a victim of our parents' manipulation as I had been, just in a different way. "The house is gone," he continued. "They're going to prison, probably for years. And I don't have anywhere to go. I don't have any money, any job, any references. Everything I thought I had was built on lies." That's when I realized the difference between justice and revenge. Revenge would have been letting him suffer in the mess our parents had created. Justice was giving him the chance to build something real for himself, the way I had. "Jake," I said, "are you ready to actually work for something? No shortcuts, no handouts, no get-rich-quick schemes." "Yes," he said immediately. "God, yes. I just want a chance to start over and do things right." So here's how the story ends, and it's probably not what you expected. I didn't ride off into the sunset leaving my brother to suffer for our parents' crimes. Instead, I helped him find a legitimate entry-level job in a completely different field, co-signed his apartment lease until he could establish credit, and even lent him money for work clothes and a security deposit. But, and this is important, it was a loan with terms, interest, and a payment schedule. I was helping him build a real life, not enabling the dependency that had ruined his relationship with our parents. Our parents are serving concurrent sentences in federal prison. They'll probably be out in 3 to 5 years if they behave themselves, and when they are, they'll emerge to find that both of their children have moved on without them. Jake and I have rebuilt our relationship on completely different terms. We're not best friends. Too much damage was done for that, but we're siblings who respect each other and check in regularly. He's working hard, paying his bills, and for the first time in his life, he's proud of what he's accomplished through his own efforts. As for me, I got the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that I don't need anyone's approval to know my worth. I built a successful career, a financial safety net, and, ultimately, a chosen family of friends and colleagues who value me for who I am, not what I can provide them. The $15,000 I'd planned to spend on their kitchen renovation? I used it to take that European vacation I mentioned, and it was the best 3 weeks of my life. So here's my question for all of you who've stuck with me through this wild journey. Have you ever had to make the choice between keeping toxic family members in your life for the sake of family loyalty versus protecting your own peace and well-being? How do you handle situations where the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally turn that love into a weapon to control you? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, and trust me, after going through this experience, I know how important it is to have a community that understands what family trauma really looks like. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama stories where karma comes full circle in the most unexpected ways. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes the best family is the one you choose for yourself, not the one you're born into. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for taking this journey with me. I hope my story helps someone else find the courage to stand up for themselves when family dynamics become toxic. Remember, you deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate your successes instead of punishing you for them, and sometimes the greatest act of love is walking away from people who can't love you properly. Until next time, remember that the best revenge is living well, but a little bit of justice served cold doesn't hurt either.